hello and welcome to Over the Binary, the official podcast of Gender Wellness of Los Angeles. My name is Grace O'Connor, and I am a California licensed marriage and family therapist and vice president of Gender Wellness of Los Angeles.
And I'm Casey Weitzman. I'm also a California licensed marriage and family therapist and the president and founder of Gender Wellness of Los Angeles.
Today, Casey and I are excited to have Dr. Marci Bowers as our guest. Dr. Bowers is an internationally recognized surgeon and a true pioneer in gender-affirming healthcare. But before we get to Dr. Bowers, a little about Casey and my journeys.
Okay, so thanks, Grace. I'm noticing now I have to look at my script somewhere else, so I'm sorry. But first and foremost, I am over the binary as a proud married lesbian woman. I came out in 1982 and was immediately kicked out of my house by a family that was embarrassed and ashamed of who I am. I felt alone in the world. I couldn't tell anybody. The shame and guilt and lack of parental support destroyed me for a very long time, but it also started me down my path of fulfilling career as a gender therapist.
Yeah, and my story has a lot of the same themes. Growing up in a cisgender, heteronormative society, it shaped a lot of my views of LGBTQ plus people. And as a result, I internalized so much shame. Working through that shame and getting to a place where I could be the truest version of myself was the journey of a lifetime. Becoming a therapist has been extremely fulfilling as I work with others in our community with the same struggles that I had. I'm very proud to do this work, and I'm also very proud to be the vice president of Gender Wellness Los Angeles. And finally, I think the challenge for both of us, for all of us as mental health providers, is holding the reality of the current social and political climate and remembering the arc of history bends towards justice. One of the reasons we do this podcast is to shed light on the obstacles our movement has overcome and to put the focus on people in our community who are making a difference. And in that spirit, Over the Binary is delighted and honored to welcome our very special guest for episode 9, Dr. Marci Bowers. Welcome.
Thank you, both of you. Thank you so much.
Well, what I can say is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Marci, but we became friends and colleagues around 2010, 2011 at a WPATH conference held at Emory College in Atlanta. We bowled and sang karaoke together and attended a few GLAAD media awards.
Oh, yes.
Shared dozens of patients over the years. We played tennis and been on cruises together. And I believe we've always had open communication. We haven't always seen eye to eye, but I've always felt like there's been a mutual respect and admiration for each other.
Why didn't we see eye to eye? I'm curious about that.
Well,
I want to work on that.
Let me see the eye to eye. I think we'll have a very good discussion today, don't you? So, yes. So go ahead. Do you want to talk a little bit about Marci?
Well, let me tell you a little bit about Marci. So Marci is a pioneer in the field of gender-affirming surgery and the first transgender woman to perform such surgeries. She is the current president of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, WPATH, and the first transgender woman to hold that post. Dr. Bowers began working with the transgender community prior to her own transition in the mid-1990s. She currently serves on the board of directors of the Trevor Project and has served previously on the boards of GLAAD and the Transgender Law Center. Over the years, Marci's been the subject of numerous documentaries, interviews, news reports, and other editorial features. Media appearances have included The Oprah Winfrey Show, The Tyra Banks Show, The Today Show, and CBS Sunday Morning. She is also the featured surgeon in the 6-part television series Sex Change Hospital that ran from 2006 to 2007, and the reality series I Am Jazz from 2016 to 2018. We could go on, but without further ado, please join me again in welcoming Dr. Marci Bowers. Welcome, Marci.
Thank you, both of you, for that lovely introduction. I'm excited to be here, talk about contemporary issues, controversies, whatever comes to mind. I'm going to follow your script, of course, but it is, as we know, it's a difficult time. And I'm not sure I'm the one who's anointed me that, but I feel like I'm the chief educator that needs to get out to the world and teach people why gender diverse identities make sense, not just personally, but also biologically, naturally, evolutionarily. It's part of who we are as a species, and it's a hopeful aspect of the future. And so what I really liked what you said earlier, Grace, was that the idea that truth bends, that justice bends in the direction, sorry, history bends in the direction of justice.
Yeah.
Or
The
some
ballpark of the
permutation of that.
universe,
Martin
right?
Luther King, actually, Martin Luther King didn't even come up with that famous phrase, but I've used it often, always associating words in the sentence, but with the same idea. And the point is that the truth will set you free. And that is why, for me, it's very easy to talk openly and honestly about this field.
Well, that's great. For those people in our audience that may not know you, could you please take a few minutes to talk about the period of your life in Trinidad, Colorado, when you were working with Dr. Stanley Biber, and after, when I believe you relocated to San Francisco?
Yes, they were really both periods. The time I spent in Colorado and obviously the time that I've had here in San Francisco were both very transformative and important in connecting the dots of at least trans surgical history. Dr. Biber, who was he was a Korean MASH physician. So in the late 1950s, there was a war fought in Korea. He worked there, came back as a general surgeon, also wanted to be a rancher, ended up in this unlikely town called Trinidad, Colorado. And then in 1969 was approached by a local social worker who was trans. He didn't know it. He said, "What's your surgery? What do you want me to do?" And he will do anything because he's Dr. Biber. And she said, "Well, I need this gender affirming surgery, or what we called then a sex change." And so at the time, the prototype drawings were available at Johns Hopkins University. Johns Hopkins has its own checkered past, I guess I would say. It was the first, so-called sex change facility where gender was evaluated and explored, and that opened in 1966. It closed less than a decade later after evaluating more than 3,000 patients. But a little known fact is that they actually only completed 27 all trans feminine vaginoplasty type surgeries. Only 27 out of 3,000 patients. So really kind of shocking. And the closure of Johns Hopkins was actually what prompted Dr. Biber's ascendancy to becoming I guess you'd call him the grandfather of American trans surgery. He, in fact, was at one point credited with having done more than 2/3 of all of the world's operations during the heyday of the 1980s. So much so that Trinidad, this little town of 9,000 people that I ended up joining him in 2003, by the 1980s, it was called the sex change capital of the world. It was a trivia answer on the quiz show Jeopardy. It was the stuff of lore. This little, basically ranching and coal mining town in southern Colorado, and here it was the sex change capital of the world. So I met Dr. Biber in the year 2000, in late May. In fact, it was May 25th. That day he was on the front cover of the USA Today newspaper back when newspapers were a big deal, and there was also snow on the ground. So 3 years later, I moved there. I packed up my family, my son, my boyfriend at the time, and we moved to Trinidad, Colorado. And attempted to fill his rather large shoes.
Amazing.
So, shall I go on? How much more detail do you want to know?
Because would you like to share anything else? Because what I mean,
Well, I mean, it was a very, I sometimes reminisce about these individual stories over long surgeries. We talk about these things, but there's just so many memories that come back from my time there. But it was a very hard sell for not only for a new surgeon. He had for years promised surgeon after surgeon after surgeon who had come through Trinidad. I think maybe they were attracted by, I don't think they were so much attracted by the mission as they were attracted by the financial rewards for doing these surgeries. And he'd say, "Oh yeah, I'll teach you that. I'll teach you that." Or maybe they were interested in the technical aspects. But whatever it was, he always promised these surgeons that they would train him, and then he never gave them. Never happened. And so June 29, he turned to me and handed me the knife.
wow.
So and then the very next morning he turned to me, and literally you could hear a pin drop all the way to Denver. It was in south to Santa Fe. It was an unimaginably intense moment.
No kidding.
Anyway, 8 years later, I moved to the West Coast, and that's enabled a lot of other things, including the development of more clinics and teaching new programs. We started first. We went to Israel. We started the program at Sheba Hospital there in Tel Aviv. We then started the program at Mount Sinai in New York, which continues to go. I'm still faculty there. It was the first ever comprehensive fellowship for trans surgery here in the U.S. And I think we've got 6 or 7 graduates that have already completed their training through there. 5 or 6, I guess, 5 or 6. And Denver Health, USC LA Children's. We started that program with Jessica Lee. We started one in Denver Health with Jen Heyer, who's now the surgeon there. We're going to Atlanta in a few weeks to start a program at Emory. Upstate New York, University of Toronto. So that's, to me, that was one thing that was missing of prior surgeons, was that they were very proprietary, and they felt like it was a small pie that they didn't want to give any part of. Yeah. And I felt like, I had already a long wait list, which was unfair to patients to have them wait 2, 3, 4, 5 years even. My wait list at one point got out to 5 years. And so that was the reason to start expanding these programs.
Which I think has been very, very generous of you, with like an all boys club, and then you wanting to expand and teach more people, which obviously is great for our clients and everyone around the world. What I was going to ask you about, you've spoken publicly about your own journey and how your family became known as a modern family. Would you mind sharing with our audience what was that journey like for you and your family?
Well, when I transitioned in the late 1990s, there weren't a lot of formulas for how to do this. I did everything wrong in the book. I started transitioning even in residency, where I self-administered hormones that I got from the OB-GYN department I was working in, and then I had this pang of loss when I hadn't had children, so I ended up stopping them, having 3 children, never discussing it with my spouse. But we met in college, and it just turns out that we're just very good friends, and so we never really found a reason to divorce. We may in the future, because I now have a partner who's very loving and I think, very interested in marriage. So we'll see how that plays out. But the key thing was that both of us had respect for one another. She was a PhD in biochemistry, from the University of Wisconsin. I was, of course, I graduated from the University of Minnesota, and in medical school, and so, we had respect for one another, and we also shared a sense of humor.
Mhm.
And those two things, got us through it. And so as a result, she never, ever from day one, ever made a pronoun mistake.
Beautiful.
My kids never, ever, 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 ever from day one made a pronoun mistake. They were 4 and 5 at the time, and my son was 1.
Wow.
So he was basically, he was 1 year old, and I'd already been on hormones for a year. So I literally went on him immediately. If he wasn't, conceived, then we wouldn't even have him. So he's kind of a miracle child too.
Okay.
And but we like each other. The kids come home twice a year. 3, one lives in London, one lives in New York, one lives with me.
So I just want to say thank you, Marci, for giving us a peek into your that personal side of your life. I think now we just want to kind of take a little bit of a turn and talk about your position as president of WPATH and maybe some WPATH questions. First question will be a two-parter. Can you share with our audience the mission of WPATH in maybe more layman's terms? And in light of Portugal being selected as the site for the next WPATH World Conference in 2024, what can you share with our audience regarding the top agenda items for WPATH and maybe the conference itself?
Okay, great. Well, WPATH has been very widely misunderstood and often mischaracterized and even marginalized by conservative sources, and as an advocacy organization. And I just want to say straight up that it is I've been in medicine for 33 years, and WPATH is as science-based and science-focused as any organization I've ever been a part of, as witnessed by any of our scientific meetings. The next US PATH meeting is in Denver in November, and I think it's from the 1st to 7th. So I encourage anyone in the field to be there for that, and you'll see just how science-focused it is. But WPATH and its mission it's called the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. And its idea, although advocacy technically is in the title, if it was my preference, I would drop any mention of advocacy, because it is a science-based and scientifically organized group of professionals who are interested in providing best practices and evidence-based recommendations for the care of transgender and gender diverse individuals.
Great.
That's so great.
It was founded in 1976. As you mentioned, I am the first person with first woman with trans history to be its president. It's been and this is where some of the criticism of WPATH has come in, is that it was disregarded by more radical members of the trans community for being a collection of cisgender white Europeans. And if you looked at its makeup, you probably would conclude the same thing looking back. But it was always about, Dr. Bieber was one of the founding members. There were a number of other, I think it was Paul, what was his name? Paul. Ooh, I should know. Or the first president, I should know his name. I'm sorry.
I don't know it either, Mark.
Psychologist here.
I wish I could pull it out.
Anyway, lots of history, and the point is that future conferences they're ever more scientifically driven, real evidence, outcomes, data. We're very interested in those who retransition or detransition, which, even though they're extremely slim in number, The conservative press has inflated their importance, and they're held up on flagpoles as though this should be a condemnation for all of trans care, which anyone in the field knows it's a rare thing that somebody decides to change their course. But anyway, we can get into that if you want to. But
I was going to ask.
WPATH is interested in probably, also keep in mind too that 80% of all of the scientific literature has been published within the past year in this field. That's a stunning figure.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very impressive. Well, I was going to ask you about the most recent version of the standards of care, which is close to 260 pages, was released. Obviously, I'm sure you're very involved in September of 2022. Can you share one or two of the big changes from the prior version, SOC 7?
Well, as you may know, we have been pushed on the left. We didn't expect pushback on the right like we've gotten, but there was certainly a push on the left for trans persons. First of all, not for transgender and gender diverse as a diagnosis, which in itself is unusual. Nowhere else in medicine do you have to, you don't have to get a diagnosis to be gay. You don't have to have a diagnosis to be bisexual, but you do to do this. So listening to the voices on the left, we really wanted to be more inclusive, and that includes adopting more of an informed consent model. Mm-hmm. So less gatekeeping, less Casey and I agree, I think we have agreement on this, that we really feel that psychological evaluation is important. Who among anyone can't use a little self-discovery? Exactly. So I do really think that it's wrong to not include a psychological, just a springboard,
right?
And then to whether we put that in the standards or not, right now it's still in there, so you'll still need a letter to proceed with some of the surgeries. Some of them have been dropped, mm-hmm. And no longer do you need a letter for access to hormones.
That's going to be when the insurance companies do understand SOC 8, because everyone's still requiring letters. Currently still 2 letters for surgery.
On surgery, and yeah.
So
some of that is probably going to go at a pace. That's going to be removed at a point that may be disappointing to people on the left, but it's also meant to be a safeguard. It really is. And when you face people who are on the conservative side, and they're all concerned about people having, getting TikTok videos and social influence and having peers. This is why these standards are in place, is so that people do get a full mental health assessment. Not that you can't be trans or non-binary and have a mental health diagnosis, but you need each addressed appropriately.
Right. And I was going to say that even with the gatekeeping, I joke sometimes that the gatekeeping is not a negative thing. It's kind of to help encourage you, to go to the providers, to feel supported. So I haven't always seen it as negative. In fact, I think the parents are kind of relieved that there is a little, maybe we change the word gatekeeping, but that we're not just racing their child for surgery. That's
absolutely right. Yeah, this is what we need to, I don't know that we need to prove anything to the people that have their own religious ideology and their very blindsided, view of male and female, as though that's the only possibility in this world. But with that aside, I think the idea of having safeguards and providing time, and then something that I always emphasize, and that is also involving the patient to say, look, this is also about personal responsibility. Don't turn around and blame your provider if you decide that this isn't the proper course for you. You know, do your research, take your time, get a thorough evaluation, and then make a decision that you can live with.
I think
I like that. That's a great perspective. I like that. A lot of work goes into making the decision whether one wants to, have gender affirming surgeries. There's a lot that goes into it. Therapy and transforming care and, social transition. There's so much of it. So yeah, I think taking the time to do that research is so important. And I think we get better outcomes when we do that.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of being, the old days, my mother would go, well, what did the doctor say? And she goes, well, I don't know. He gave me this medicine and that was it, and it was going in as a passive. You need to be an active participant when you're seeking trans care. You need to be involved. You need to be engaged. You need to be informed. And some of that means doing your own homework, not just relying on a mental health person or a doctor. And then the second area where I think it's exciting is that the expansion of and addressing what's going on with non-binary identities. I struggled with this in my own practice. How do you? But not really a struggle. I think it's an important link that we. And I just attended last month's GLAAD Awards in New York City, and what an exciting, joyous, just tremendously diverse, the racial diversity, the gender, the identity diversity, the clothing, the music. It was so positive, and it just felt so futuristic. But among that, the biggest difference was the number of they were male identified or non-binary identified, but wearing whatever the hell they wanted. So rocking a skirt, a wig, lipstick, high heels, trans masculine or assigned female persons doing just the opposite, just making it work for them. And the creativity and the love that you felt in that room was just overwhelming.
Yeah, it's so great to be a part of that, isn't it? It's so great to see the younger generations celebrating diversity and just celebrating the spectrum.
Yeah, and they don't care. As I tell people too, this isn't the end of male and female. This isn't the end of families or reproduction or it's about really finding identity and finding happiness. And gender is a huge part of that.
Sure is. Yeah. Well, we might have one other WPATH related question, but I just thought maybe I'd throw out a few facts and figures. Trans and non-binary youth are disproportionately burdened by poor mental health outcomes owing to decreased social support and increased stigma and discrimination. In a study published by the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2022, of 104 trans and non-binary youth aged 13 to 20 years who received gender-affirming care, including puberty blockers and hormones, 60% experienced lower odds of depression, 73% experienced lower odds of suicidality. And we talked a little bit about surgical regret earlier. In a review of 27 studies involving 8,000 teens and adults, a very comprehensive study, who had transgender surgeries, 1% on average expressed regret. Plastic surgeries and orthopedic care have higher rates of regret for surgeries. So this kind of leads to my next question, Marci, which is, there was an article published by Abigail Schreier in October 2022, in which you were quoted as saying, regarding children in the early stages of puberty being put on puberty blockers, I'm not a fan. But to be fair, you penned a really eloquent article for the New York Times a year and a half later titled, What Decades of Providing Trans Healthcare Have Taught Me, in which you highlight the fact that, one, puberty blockers have been used since the 1980s. They've been approved by the FDA. They buy time for gender diverse individuals to gain clarity with their gender, and that side effects from puberty blockers are fully reversible if taken within certain windows. Can you explain the disparity maybe between what you were perceived to have stated in the Abigail Schreier article and what you wrote about in the New York Times article?
Well, a lot of people haven't read Abigail Schreier's book, but I actually have. And, you know, it's parental fear is what she expresses fairly eloquently. You know, where did this come from? You know, why are there so many girls that are transitioning? Or I should say, assign female individuals. Why, you know, I'm college educated. Why are we rushing to do this? Why is time of the essence? And is this real? Are they really happy? You know, there's all these, you know, it's basically fear and doubt is expressed over the course of an entire book. So, but my observations, and again, I still have to apologize to the community because I don't consider Abigail Schreier a bad person. I think again, she's expressing fear and doubt, and the honesty that I gave her was probably something that should have been reserved for our medical community. Although Casey knows I've been talking about this, I've been very concerned about the surgical results when someone is blocked so early. Now, we have operated on, I would argue pretty vehemently, probably on more patients who have been blocked at Tanner stage 2 than any other location in the US. And they are difficult surgeries. They are difficult, and they're probably, the outcomes are not as satisfying. You know, they're just not cosmetic. Now, I've gotten criticism. People come up and say, oh, well, she's just a gynecologist and she's an old surgeon and there's newer techniques. I'm sorry, the peritoneum doesn't obviate that problem. Colon doesn't obviate that problem. You know, you block someone as early as Tanner 2, and that limits their amount of skin that they have, even to create external genitalia. So you know, but when you talk to the families and the children that were blocked at that age, even if they had complications, even if they even lost their vagina, even if they hadn't been able to orgasm, which was another concern of mine, they're overwhelmingly happy that they were blocked, that they were allowed to transition at that age. So I don't know what the right answer is, although it to me, it gives me pause. And I've said this even at times, I said, if it was my child, I kind of would want them just to get a little bit into puberty. You know, if you transition at 13 or 14, you're going to be orgasmic, which you'll carry on for the rest of your life, no matter if you have surgery or not. You'll have likely enough material to do a traditional surgery. And you can even have, if you want to have children, that is also an option for saving sperm. So that's where my thinking has evolved. And but I never, when it's indicated, and if it's truly informed consent, then I think that blockers still need to be available for people who want to avoid any of the early stages of puberty.
Right, and I agree with that. I think that now that most of my practice is adolescence, it really is case by case, and really talking about the dysphoria and how painful it is for the child, and obviously for the parents too. So that's why I think the counseling can be very helpful in helping the family make that decision. And obviously, we talk about fertility and really talking about, you know, either storing sperm and in a few cases egg donors. So that,
I mean, those are tough things to talk about to a 9 and 10 or 11-year-old.
Absolutely.
You know, if somebody came to me with that information, I would be so embarrassed. I would be just like, but you know, these kids are much more mature for their age than we give them credit for. but you know, because it's, if you're really talking about informed consent, it's very, very difficult to, when you've only lived 10 or 11 years, to think about what it's going to be like when you're 18 and 19 and 20.
Right.
And that's my concern. I've lived a long time and I've seen a lot of things, and I just think, you know, we have to be careful. And same with parents. You know, they're following advice, but they want to do the right thing, but they don't want to have, you know, they don't want to have their child need all these cosmetic surgeries because they went through some puberty. They want to have this nice normal life, but it's, you know, I even recommended having a surgeon see the child at age 13, and that fell flat. You know, none of the surgeons are like, I don't want to see any 13-year-olds.
Huh.
But I mean, you know, it's somewhere in there is probably an answer that it may not cover every person, and it probably still is individualized, but it, you know, we have to really have a very long lens at how we counsel these individuals.
What's so interesting now, and Grace, I don't know, you probably feel this way, is I always meet with the parents first without the kid, and just say, you know, what are your expectations? And the parents are always like, I just wish my kid was gay. Like that's like, okay.
And
well,
that's basic. Abigail Schreier says in her book. Basically, that's what Abigail Schreier says. Can't they just be where'd all the lesbians go?
Yeah, well, that's a whole other, because I'm wondering where they are too. But since we don't have one bar in West Hollywood or most places, but that's a whole nother discussion. But I'll say, well, you know what? They might be gay too. Like we're dealing with sexual orientation and gender identity. So, you know, we just want your child to be healthy and, you know, happy in their lifetime. But usually the parents, a lot of times, are also ahead of the kid. After the kid comes out, then the parents like, hey, let's get going. And the kid's like, slow down. Slow down. Now that I told you, it still has to be at my pace. So I always think that can be refreshing too. And you know, whatever the parents have to go through, it's a lot of grieving and loss and excitement. And you know, but like I said, the kids, and I don't know if it's because of social media, but you're right, they're more educated, they understand it more. But again, I always think counseling can be kind of helpful in any of these cases. I don't know, Grace, if you want to add anything to that.
I just think it's so nuanced, and I wish that, you know, the right could understand that the nuance that goes into this. You know, we have kids that are coming to us with suicidality, self-harm, food disorders, you know, hair pulling, you know, suicidal ideation, and you know, we're trying to help them through that, and it's a multi.
Absolutely.
Right. And it's a
You
multi.
know, and the skeptics would say, oh, it's because they have a mental health disorder. But
Right.
that doesn't, you know, I mean, you all know, you know how thoughtful you are, you know how in depth you get to know these individuals. Yes, those things can coexist. But rarely are they a cause. You know, you're not transgender because you're suicidal, or because you, or I should say, you're not because you're depressed or anxious.
Yes.
It's or because you had an eating disorder. That's not why you're trans.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
And a lot of times when we treat the depression and the anxiety, or treat the eating disorder, or treat the self-harm, the client is then able to get a sense of, you know, they're in their bodies and like, okay, so what do I feel? And what are my feelings about this? And who am I? They can, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs have been met. And now let's talk about self-actualization. Like, you have a place to live, you have stability, you have a social support network, you have your family supporting you, you're in school. It's like, all right, now what's the best version of you? And you can't deal with that until you've dealt with all the other stuff below that.
Well, I alluded to this also in the New York Times article, is that yes, we have societal questions that we have to face, and one of the real challenges, I'm sure you see it, is the mental health crises amongst teenagers in general. You know, it's really hard, and you can see, you know, the world is so expensive. There's so many performance anxieties that are put on kids, time pressures that we never had. We used to play for 3 hours and then have dinner before we even thought about homework. And now kids are coming home and they literally have to log in and transmit their homework electronically and be worried about artificial intelligence and plagiarism and getting into the best schools and writing the best essays. And there's so much pressure that we really didn't have. And that's what we should be talking about. Yeah. Not that, if anything, as you see, when they finally assume their self-actualization, they become who they are, that's light lifting. That's just, they are happier. They are,
they
emerge. Yeah. And I've seen it again and again and again.
Yes, they blossom.
They blossom. And we've seen it. Well, I've seen it for over 30 years now. So, well, I guess I was going to ask you about what you see as the importance of mental health professionals to transgender, gender diverse individuals. And can you see a difference in your patients that come to you that have had some mental health support and those that have not?
Well, we follow the standards of care, so we require mental health evaluations before undergoing gender affirming bottom surgery.
Yeah.
So I feel like all of ours do get some. Now there's better mental health support than others, but I think the process works well. It's not even compared to 20 years ago. When I was seeing patients, sometimes I would just scramble because I'd look at them, and of course I was thinking at it with a very binary focus then, and going, you really don't fit in a female box.
Right.
Most or a male. Actually, it was more the, mostly what I do is the trans feminine surgery anyway. But so I was mostly seeing those. But if they didn't fit into this binary box of what a woman is like, if they hadn't even grown their hair out or they hadn't done any electrolysis, I became concerned. Now less so because of this, because of the emergence of a non-binary identity. But I also feel like mental health and that psychological adjunct that is required for people to follow is really, really useful. I mean, they come in very, very well prepared now.
Some of my clients who come and see you, right, adore you. They have to come back and see you every couple months, right? So
well, we have some fans more than others, but
well, usually the fans
you have them well prepped, Casey. Yes,
we try.
They're lovely and adoring. Absolutely.
So maybe just one last question, Marci. So you've been working in this field for a long time. How has trans-affirming care changed in that time since you began, and how it is now?
I mean, there's so much to cover in that. I started in the around my time of transition. Once people knew I was transitioning, I began to see especially transmasculine individuals coming in, and I was doing hysterectomies and primary care, PAPs, GYN care for those individuals. I moved into doing the major feminizing vaginoplasties in the early 2000s. So yes, a lot of things back then. Even when back then it was almost all cash, though, cash paid. That was a big change. And even when I moved to California, 90% of our patients were cash pay. So just in 13 years, there's so much more insurance coverage. So that's been very positive for patients. We were the first to accept commercial insurance without making them pay for the whole surgery up front. I said, that's very important. You need to do that. Otherwise, it's a huge barrier to care and all that. So I've been trying to reduce barriers to care. That's really what that's all about. The other is that people come now with so much more family and spousal and partner support. It used to be only 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 10 would even come with a friend. now it's maybe 1 out of 10 won't have anybody with them. They're almost always here with support, which is really, really nice around the time of surgery.
I agree.
Oh, that's great.
That's been very positive. And then probably the emergence of non-binary identities and getting, older folks like me to come around and how the language has changed even in my day, where we went from sex change to sex reassignment surgery to then I called it gender reassignment surgery, and then finally I think I was also the one that coined the term gender affirming surgery.
Yeah.
I at the 2001 WPATH, then Harry Benjamin meeting, I coined the term gender diversity.
Oh,
Or at least I was the first that I had never heard it mentioned like that. And gender variance.
Mm-hmm.
Those are
use
terms.
those terms all the time, Marci.
So those are kind of used now as general language. I don't know that I can claim that I coined them, but I certainly was using them widely even back then. So I kind of saw that coming. I didn't see the number of non-binary, utterly non-binary identities that I do now. That really surprises me. Like I saw at the GLAAD Awards, that was really, really mind-blowing. Some really cool people.
Yeah,
So-
I think
there's so much more to explore. There's so much more to do, but the understanding that there is a continuum between male and female. I don't, yes, things cluster on the binary. There's always going to be male. There's always going to be female, but to see the how that has filled in the middle is hopeful, and it's futuristic.
I agree. I'm going to ask you one question that's not in the script, but I just wanted to know your opinion on it, and then we'll close down the podcast. How are you feeling about doctors that want to do the zero depth vaginoplasty, or because there are some surgeons locally that really have been pitching it really hard. What are your thoughts about that?
I've been really outraged about that for a long time. I think it's a reflection, as you said, doctors who want to do zero depth. It's because of their lack of skills. It's a very difficult surgery to do. For them to impose their will on another patient is really, I think it's deceitful. It's dishonest. It's a bit shameful.
Yeah.
We certainly will do them, and I actually will raise the question with patients, especially if they, I always say, you have to consider what are your long-term needs. Do you really need a vagina for your own identity or for your own sexual function? And if you don't, you really should think about it. But nonetheless, we do no more than 2 or 3 per year, and that's all it really should be in most practices. To do more than that, to do 40% like a lot of practices are doing, that's just a reflection of their own lack of skills.
Okay, because that's what I mean, clients are coming to me now saying that this was pitched to them, and I'm like, based on what? And so I'm hoping there's going to be more discussion at further conferences about kind of basic, again, it's still like the
bitch about it every single conference. It's outrageous.
It's that white.
This is again where patients have to be. The thing is that if you're told, here you are at a surgeon, and if they tell you, you're gonna, if you have the surgery the traditional way, your house is gonna burn down, your dog is gonna die, and your spouse is gonna run away. Of course you're gonna avoid that.
Yes.
They're saying you're gonna have to dilate. You're gonna have to dilate.
You want to dilate. You could get a fistula. You could get a. Well.
Okay.
All right. The key is to get better at what you do. Do it better so that
Okay.
Do your job better. You're a surgeon, or you shouldn't be in the field.
Okay, thank you. Because I've never gotten so much of this in the last couple of years. And I'm like, what? I don't even know what to say, but I want you to get a second opinion, because I don't think, in my mind, I'm thinking you're not going to be happy with that, but I'm not wearing, well, actually I'm wearing the white coat today, but
Lovely. You look gorgeous.
Thank you. All right, so
You both do.
thank you. So Marci, I want to thank you so much for being with us today. I know I've learned stuff. I know everyone has learned a great deal. Obviously, I appreciate you and I appreciate your service to our community and look forward with great anticipation to our next time together.
Well, I'm writing, my next opinion piece is going to be on trans athletics.
Excellent.
And so I'm going back to the New York Times with that. And then I'm on MSNBC next week, and sometime coming up soon, sometime this summer, Face the Nation on CBS.
Oh, that's so great. Thank you, Marci, and thank you all for listening, being a part of our show. For more information on Dr. Bowers and Gender Wellness of Los Angeles, please visit our website at www.genwell.org and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. This has been Over the Binary, the official podcast of Gender Wellness of Los Angeles. Stay safe and happy Pride.
Happy Pride.
Thank you, Marci. You were great.